Hi, my name's Elizabeth.
And I'm Justin.
And this is Late Night Review. Tonight we're going to be carrying on our conversation about aliens.
Yeah.
So if you caught that other episode, then you'll be right on target. If you haven't, go check it out.
Talked about aliens being here, being present, and came to our conclusions on that. But let's, for the sake of argument, let's just say there's multiple different species that, what we would call species, that visit and or have been here or have been living here or whatever the case might be. If that is the case, okay. But that's still something that's being done in secret, more or less, not known to the world. So my question is, what would it look like? What do you think it would reasonably look like if aliens did just introduce themselves to us?
What would it look like
What would it
for
look
our
like? Yeah.
society?
Well, no, what would it look like, the actual act? Because you have Independence Day 4, you have Close Encounters, you have all these different movies that depict what it would be like if an alien species actually introduced themselves en masse to Earth, or to humans, or if they would do it a different way. What do you, if you thought it through, being an intelligent individual, what would you think that would look like? Like, how would they go about it? I mean, if they're reasonable and intelligent.
I think it would probably be something like what I already think that they're doing. And that is, I think this sounds crazy. I know it sounds crazy, but everything sounds crazy until it's proven.
True.
Until it turns out to be true, right?
Sure.
But I think they're already crossbreeding.
They're already crossbreeding. So
yeah. So it's a slow introduction of them into our society, so that way when they do make their appearance or their debut, maybe most people accept them because they already have it in them to not really care. Maybe, I don't know how that will work out, but I'm thinking maybe they're just slowly working themselves into our race as humans.
So as opposed to some level of formal introduction to the planet.
Right. They're
It
not
would
like
be slowly introduced with minimal people knowing about it, if any, human, because there's no real reason why they would have to be in on it. But if they were doing that, if they're doing that as you think they may be, have they already made contact with governments of different nations?
Yes.
Yes,
I
but
think
so
they
governments.
Have. Yes.
Okay. Also gone different routes, perhaps. Maybe they are spreading it out in terms of, well, if the government gets crazy, because we know how they get if they've done this before, then introducing themselves to small homogenous groups of individuals, such as certain cults or religions, or people who hold a certain political belief or view, or something, like however they might determine that this particular group of people will accept us. Let's start there for our introduction, but don't tell the broader public, just this group and just this group and this. You think that's something that could be going on? Or has gone on?
Yeah, I guess it could be something. Really, anything could be something that's going on. Yeah. I do think that they have made contact with our governments, and there is actually belief that they made a treaty with Eisenhower.
Mm-hmm.
So does that sound right?
After World War II in the 50s, right?
It was actually here in New Mexico, where they claimed that they met up, and it was actually down in Alamogordo on Holloman Air Force Base. And the story goes as claimed that Eisenhower flew in to meet with the gray species, and they came up with whatever treaty they came up with. And from then, I believe that they actually do have contact. Maybe some species, some species. I think there's different species of aliens. I think some are working with their government and maybe not doing the best of things. I think some of it is kind of evil in nature.
Benevolent.
Yeah, there you go. And then some is positive. But I think that's with any race, even on Earth with humans. I think we have, it's clear we have people who lean towards the evil side, and there's people who lean towards the light, God. And the way I see it is, why would it not be like that outside of Earth with other species? You're going to have good and you're going to have bad.
Got you. Okay, so they're already here. They've made some level of treaty with at least the American government.
At least, yeah.
With the USG. and there may be multiple different species, or one species that has benevolent characters or actors within it. Intentions within it. So as you're saying that, it reminds me of when the United States goes to a foreign country and starts interdicting in their daily politics and society and everything like that, either whether it's through big business or if it's the government going to war or whatever. You always have multiple different factions of Americans going over there with different intentions and things of that nature. So why would it be any different for an alien species to introduce themselves to a different species? So that's what comes to my mind. I don't see necessarily why it would have to be or necessarily would be different. So let's say that that's going on, and then let's take an assumption that at some point though they have to introduce themselves in a large manner.
Why?
Let's just say they need to for whatever their next purposes are, or whatever the case might be. Or if they're like, listen, people are just on to us. We listened to Late Night Review. They know. They know.
They know.
People are hip to this. They know about the treaty. They know about the different species. They know some of us are good. Some of us suck. They're on to it. Late Night Review let us know that. So let's say they're like, it's just time to bust this open. What's the next step? What do they do to just make themselves known to the world? What do you do? I mean, how do you do it? How do you intelligently do it?
Maybe you get several, since they have a crossbreed, we'll just go with that. I'm sure there's other ways they could exist in our society and we don't even know that they're not human because they look just like humans. Maybe they have a way of like cloaking themselves. I don't know. But anyway, so let's just say whatever means they use to look human, maybe they get themselves to hold political positions. So that way when they make their announcement, whatever, you already have these several individuals in key places to then be like, let's just say they go on air or something and be like, hey, I'm blah, blah, blah. And then I'm actually part of this alien race.
The squad. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Oh, no. Gosh, I hope
What
not.
if all them were like, hey, by the way.
I would say they're probably they would be the Greys because they're pretty hostile.
We're just like, damn, these politics of this extraterrestrial species is going to be rough.
Yeah. If you don't know much about different species of aliens, the Greys are believed to be pretty like ruthless. They'll kill, they'll do whatever they want, and they really don't seem to have a
whole lot of
conscience.
Yeah, they don't have any empathy.
Yeah, no empathy from what's been described by many people.
What if it was just like Nancy Pelosi's like, hey,
I would say she's probably either the Greys or she's reptilian.
They
say the reptilian species also tends to actually go after political positions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a possibility that she's probably reptilian.
I do want to distinguish, though, and make sure that we're not grouped in with the same level of folk who think that there's a deep level reptilian, like, presence within it. You know what I mean?
No. What do you
I don't believe that.
That there's reptilian species?
Well, I believe that there could be a reptilian-like species that is alien to Earth. I certainly do. But the way they make it out, I don't know. I've just never been able to jive. And I've tried real hard to jive with some weird shit. Flat Earth, all that. I've tried real hard to make myself try to believe it, to dive in full force. And like with the flat Earth theory, the whole reptilian thing, I was just like, I don't know. I think these people like are legitimately batshit crazy. Those who believe that stuff.
I'm batshit crazy.
No, you don't believe. I don't think you believe like. I don't think you believe like the people I've listened to believe. I just don't think that.
I don't know what level of people you've listened to.
Their shit is like trans-dimensional, deep He-Man level cartoon anime bullshit.
That's a lot.
Excuse my language for all that.
I don't.
But it's just like when I listen, I'm like, listen. If there was an extraterrestrial species that looks like what we would call reptilian, with that level of skin and scales or whatever, then okay, that to me is just what it is. But I mean, if there's some trans-dimensional, like, action-packed movie craziness going on, that I mean, the stuff that I've heard about that is just off the wall.
What have you heard?
Reptilian stuff that
tell
they
us
just sit there and
heard.
they
let's just hear what you heard.
They eat people. They
are.
I
think I've heard that before.
Yeah, like a reptile. Would digest people. It's weird shit. I mean, it's like they get together and they have reptilian.
Snakes would eat
people. Reptilian crazy. So they attribute to these extraterrestrials that which we would see from reptiles on Earth. You know what I mean? That's where I'm just like, what are you talking about? But anyway, I just can't get it. And then you have what people call the Nordics.
Yes.
What some people, you say, well, there's Greys, and then there's Nordics, and Nordics for some people are the angels, and the Greys are demons and stuff like that. There's just a lot out there.
Yeah,
All I'm saying, I just want to make sure it's not what I'm saying is I believe that due to the trillions of galaxies and multi-trillions of potential planets that there is out there, then to me it's a certainty that there has to be intelligent life such as ourselves. I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back or anything, such as ourselves to distinguish us from lower mammals or whatever, that have gained space travel and have the possibility of having visited multiple different places within the galaxy, within the universe. So that's what I believe. When it feeds into some level of political left-right reptilian conspiracy theory stuff, I can't buy into that. It doesn't fit.
Well, your question was, how do I think they would introduce themselves to our society? And I think they are doing that. I think they really are putting themselves in political positions. Maybe at some point they wanted to introduce themselves to our society, and our government didn't allow it.
Yeah, they were like, maybe not.
They're like, no. And so maybe at that point, maybe after, who knows? This is all speculation because we don't know.
Well, yeah.
And maybe it was just like the governments are just like, no, humans can't handle that. And I would agree that the majority of humans can't handle that, as we discussed in our last video of why maybe they couldn't handle that. And so they went about it through other means.
That would make good sense to me. And I'm not saying that couldn't be the case. I mean, that would be intelligent. But then at some point there would be a breakthrough paradigm shift moment where it's like, we got to introduce ourselves. We got to go to the next phase of this thing. We can't just keep, unless their goal is multiple generations of just breeding natural humans out of it. And it's like, soon they just at some point say, hey, listen, I know you guys think we're alien. You guys are partly us. We've introduced our DNA into you since the 40s, what you would call the 40s. And we decided after 4 and 5 generations, when 50% of the population of Earth contains some level of DNA, extraterrestrial DNA, that we would let it be known. So in that way, you don't have quite the culture, quite the shock that you would otherwise.
Sure.
Where it's just human, extraterrestrial, and then some level of Independence Day, Will Smith, levels and stuff happens. I don't see why not.
How do you think that they would go about to introduce themselves?
I hope they wouldn't do that, because that is a significant violation. Right? Like, don't you think? Hey, by the way, we've been introducing our DNA slowly into you guys. You know that little vaccine stuff that you get when you're younger? They're like, that shit ain't vaccine.
I don't think that would come in a vaccine.
Well, no, I'm saying it's like you got to get shots. You're like, your rounds of shots when you're younger. They're like, well, what that really was is a level of. So what I'm saying is that would be like, hey, we're here, and guess what? We've been violating you for 4 generations now, and you're partly us. I'd be like, what? I don't remember signing up for that.
Well, people do have their experiences of being abducted.
Sure. And no one's okay. Not many people are okay with that.
Well, and they've described there are some people who have been pregnant and then, have gone to the hospital or to the doctors for all their ultrasounds and everything, and the pregnancy is going as normal, and then they get abducted and then the baby's gone. Right. And they go obviously back to the hospital because there's blood and they're worried about their baby, and they do an ultrasound and it's like, there's no baby in there. Yeah. And they're like, there was just one last week when you were here, whatever it was. And there's several accounts I've come across, stories like this, of people who've experienced that. So maybe they are violating us and
well, that would be,
taking
to answer
children.
your question, that would be absolutely the wrong way to go about it, in my opinion. Because then it's like when they introduce themselves, like, we had to, like, abduct some of you and take your children, and it's like a big old you. Like, we don't want you. Get the out of here. Like, no. Maybe if you would have been like, hey, here we are. Things are going to be crazy for a while, like, while you get used to the fact that you're not the only, people in the galaxy. But at least we didn't abduct you and take your kids and, slowly make you us. You know what I mean?
Well, maybe it's only
That
a
wouldn't be
certain
it.
species that's doing that.
Right. And then, so you have, like, ones that are doing that stuff, and then another species going, like, they ain't going to turn out right.
Yeah.
They ain't going to like that.
Yeah.
So we ain't going to do that, but we're going to hang back
until
you, get crazy enough. And then we'll interdict. But I mean, maybe. I mean, there could be so much. There could let's make sure we cover the bases here. There could be absolutely nothing going on.
Yeah.
And then there could be so much going on
that it would blow everybody's
mind. And then there could just be like something in the center. So understanding. I mean, you can we know what it's like to live with nothing going on. I mean, at least I do. You've always believed in some level extraterrestrial. I haven't though. So I mean, I grew up just thinking, oh, it's us. That's about it. Like, so I never had that thought of extraterrestrial and all that. I just never had it until I was older. So I remember what that feels like, and it was just like, focus on the day and just go about your business, and that was it. But to think that there is a great deal going on around us, like, I mean, it just.
I don't see how. To me, I don't find it too far from a possibility, because I believe in God, and I know that we have angels watching over us, and I believe there are other dimensions. Mm-hmm. And just because we can't see something because of the dimension we're in doesn't mean the other dimensions don't exist.
Sure.
And it doesn't mean that they aren't interacting with this dimension.
Right.
With my beliefs, I believe there is good and I believe there is evil, and just because we don't see it with our own eyes, I think some people can see some stuff, but for the most part, I think that is happening around us. Like, there is a war going on around us that we don't see every day physically, but I honestly believe that exists. So could this be taking place and we're not seeing it? Why not? So we only see with our visual spectrum of light. Put on infrared and you see a whole different life.
Right.
And that's within what we can put over our eyes.
That's a good depiction or animation of different dimensions. What you could call a different dimension. Something that you can't see otherwise without some sort of aid of sort. But in any case, yeah. So I agree. I agree with that. I didn't grow up necessarily believing in evil and in a active war going on around us, or what we would call a war. I didn't grow up necessarily thinking that, but I have no option but to believe that now, because I've experienced that over the years. So that being the case, I accept that that's going on. And if someone was going to ask me if angels and demons were real, I would just be like, I can't say anything but yes, because I've experienced that. But how that plays into the larger picture and extraterrestrials and that's what I'm not certain about.
How does that specifically play into extraterrestrials?
Believing that there's angels and demons, and that's one point of fact, and then believing that there's extraterrestrials, which are, in my opinion, physical beings just like us from distant places.
Just a different planet or something.
Yeah. I don't know much about the dimension level of stuff. If you were to ask me about angels and demons, I would say that would be a different dimension, a dimension which we call the spiritual dimension, mm-hmm. right? But if you were to ask me about extraterrestrials, flesh and blood extraterrestrials, I would say that's from a different physical planet. Star Trek level stuff. You know what I mean? Star Wars level stuff. Mm-hmm. A physical being from different planets, blah, 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 that evolved in a certain way just like we did. So I don't know how that plays in and how that crosses over.
To me, it's two separate things.
Mm-hmm. But they're still influenced. So aliens would still be influenced by the larger good and evil.
I would imagine so.
Yeah. I would think that.
I don't know why it would only pertain to Earth.
Earth, yeah.
Just because, like, we can put humans in a rocket and send them off to the moon, and it doesn't leave their...
Right. Yeah, it's no good and bad on the moon. They're like, no, I still have impure thoughts and shit.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, so it goes with them.
I still know that it's good to do this and not good to do that. So it's certainly, I would say it's a universal principle, just like we think gravity. You know what I mean? It's universal throughout the Earth. Or throughout the universe.
Yeah, I could see that.
Same, just in a different dimension.
Right.
That's how I think of it. But I think the way I'm thinking of it is incredibly juvenile. You know what I mean? It'd be like the way that Bradley, our son, thinks of something that he doesn't yet understand, like watching a plane fly in the sky. He doesn't know about thrust and lift and all that sort of stuff that we happen to know about. And so to us, it takes away he thinks of it in a very maybe magical, innocent way. You know, he throws a ball and it doesn't. He's like, well, that ball or that thing, when you throw it doesn't come down. And that's all he knows.
Yeah.
So I think I'm thinking about the universality of good and evil, and comparing it to gravity. I think that's a very juvenile way to think of it, but that's all I got to think about.
Yeah.
That's all I have. So
that's all I
don't
got.
have more.
Do you think that our government, as in the United States or any other government in the world, has possession of any extraterrestrial vehicles?
Yes. I believe the Bob Lazar story.
Okay.
I wouldn't say hook, line, and sinker. What I would say is, as he has explained it multiple times, multiple decades, I believe that. I believe what he's saying. So because I believe that, I have to believe that at least the United States government has possession of extraterrestrial vehicles, the definition of which would be something that is not of this earth, and we can tell because it has technology incorporated into it that we don't have.
Yes.
That we don't see.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't seen.
Yeah, if you don't know about Bob Lazar, I would suggest to definitely look him up and find out what you can about him. He is a rocket scientist.
He deals with propulsion.
Do you want to give a outline?
A recap is that he's a brilliant individual and a scientist, a propulsion. He deals with propulsion, and since the 80s, he's been working, or in the 80s, he worked for the government at Los Alamos Labs here in New Mexico. And then he was recruited to work at a top secret site, which we now know to be called, thanks to him, Area 51, which is obviously in Nevada. Anyone who knows anything about any of this stuff knows the name Area 51, but perhaps you don't know the designation of the place, the site on Area 51, in Area 51, which is called S4, which is what Bob Lazar claims he worked there on propulsion systems that had to do with controlling gravity. He came out after seeing this and multiple alien aircraft that he identified as alien or extraterrestrial because we simply don't have the technology.
And also because he was asked to back engineer that
craft. So obviously if you're back engineering something, you didn't build it, and you don't know who did build it, or maybe you do, but you don't have access to them, so you need to back engineer it so you know how it works, so that you can duplicate that technology. He worked on alien technology, and then he broke this story saying that he worked at a government facility that worked on extraterrestrial propulsion systems and vehicles. And it became a whole thing in the early 90s when it was
actually 86 or
86 when there was a whole expose done on him and what he has seen and experienced in this S4 Area 51 location. And then subsequently since he went public with this information, he's had a difficult life.
Yeah. Being
raided by multiple different government agencies and then et cetera, et cetera. So the most important thing to remember about Bob Lazar, though, is that this isn't someone who became famous in the ufology circles of the world or whatever because he wanted to. He just came out and shared information that he felt he should because he believes it's the most significant discovery or the most significant information that could possibly be shared with the general public of the world.
The human race.
With the human race. And so he came out because he thought it was the right thing to do. And he's held a consistent story for over 3.5 decades now about what he saw, what he experienced, and et cetera, et cetera. So But oftentimes when you hear about people like this, what subsequently happens is they change their story, or they recant their story, or whatever the case might be, or it's very easy for people to prove that what they're saying is there's no basis. Maybe it's not false, but you certainly can't prove that it's true, or what have you. The amount of time and effort and energy that people have put into trying to discredit Bob Lazar is not only his what he says he saw and experienced, but also where he worked, his places of employment, as well as going back into his very education and trying to just erase all of that. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of telling how much time and effort's been put in trying to silence him and to just erase any shred of possible credibility that he has as an individual, as a scientist. So
and some people
it all comes together very well.
Yes, some people do hang their hat on some of the ways he's been discredited, mm-hmm. and
inconsistencies, they say.
But he's not inconsistent in what he's saying.
They try to say it.
And I think maybe again that goes right back to what we've talked about before. And people you can't handle the truth, and they can't handle it. So it's just like, I will hang on to any minuscule thing I can. Right. A lot of the things that people,
we find every reason not to.
Very true. A lot of people are like, oh, he doesn't have an education. They can't find his degrees, blah, blah, blah. The schools say he didn't go there. And
so they say.
So they say, yes. But George Knapp, he was the anchor, the news anchor who actually broke this story with Bob Lazar back in the 80s. Mm-hmm. He went through the whole process of finding the credentials for him. And he was saying that they're a very credible news station, and they didn't want to just break this story and lose the credibility in the public and their trust. And so he was saying at the time that he had contacted the schools he had went to, Robert, and they were actually going to provide him with some of that information, and that he was supposed to receive it, and he didn't receive it. And then he called back like 2 weeks later and was like, hey, what's going on? And it was just went to shut him down right away. And then that was the end. Like all of a sudden he didn't go to school there anymore. We have no idea who it was. And then it was the same thing with Los Alamos. And George Knapp was also saying that at that time back then, he had at one point went with Bob Lazar to Los Alamos. He had went in with him, and they filmed, is what he said. This last interview I watched of him, he was actually talking with Joe Rogan. George Knapp was. And so he was saying that they went in, he talked to people knew who he was, but when they try to find the credentials that he worked there, they're just like, we don't know who he is. Yeah. Yet there were people there that knew him. They're like, hey, how's it going, blah, blah, blah. And he just went showing them around the facility, knowing the layout very well. It just goes on and on. And then it's like, okay, well, give me information. They're like, we don't know who this guy is. Yeah. I don't know.
And for me, it breaks down to, you have an individual who hasn't got rich off of this information, has received a lot of ridicule and a lot of trouble for his disclosures. Number one. Number two, this gentleman now runs a United Nuclear, which is, this guy obviously knows his stuff. He's a scientist. I mean, anyone can tell that by just researching him and what he does and seeing his inventions and all that. This guy's obviously intelligent and a scientist. So, but more than all this, what he did was, when he came to the point where it was time to make this disclosure, he went to a reputable news source, and then investigation was done, etc. So this wasn't just someone who came out and wrote a book and claimed it and really doesn't have anything to back it up. It was done properly, and he's held on to his story for decades and decades now. Someone could do that and it wouldn't be worth necessarily believing. But if you watch it, if you watch him, if you see the research and the studies and the deep dive that's been done on him and his background, etc., etc., I think it comes out pretty clear.
Yes.
Yeah. And I've done a check before on myself. I said, do I want to believe this? Is there something inside of me that wants to believe this? And so I'm trying to steer away from anything that would dissuade me from not believing it. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I come out the other end, I'm like, no, not really. If it wasn't true, it's not true. And that's, being a former conspiracy theorist, That's not really a big deal. My paradigm shifted so many times that it just, if that wasn't true, I'd be like, yeah, well, that sucks. So I don't need it to be true. I'm not hanging my hat on it. It just seems like something is true.
Well, for me, I actually remember his story back in the early 90s. It may have actually been the late 80s. I'm not sure when. I actually was introduced to his story through the old show. It was called Unsolved Mysteries. Mm-hmm. And growing up watching that, and I honestly didn't believe his story.
Yeah.
Based off of what they showed on Unsolved Mysteries. And I just felt like, I was just like, I don't know, the way he talks, it just didn't seem too believable. And so that was my belief for over 20 years. I was just kind of like brushed it off. And it wasn't until I started getting a little more information on it, on him and the whole situation, the whole thing that transpired, that I actually changed my mind. I'm like, I do think this guy is telling the honest truth. So, I flip sides based off of the research and information I received through the years. And I changed my mind. Yeah. I think he's telling the truth.
In which case, that would, going back to our original questions, the original topic, would prove that in some way, shape, or form, extraterrestrials certainly have visited Earth.
Yes.
Because we have their technology.
And he has also expressed that someone had asked him, like, where did the government get a hold of this disc? And he said it was from an archaeological dig. So, which also, if you didn't watch our last video, go check it out, because we were actually talking about, or I think maybe extraterrestrials have interacted with our species as humans since ancient times.
A lot of reason to believe that, I think.
Maybe they have them hidden around the Earth. Maybe they're not hidden. Maybe they're just ditched.
I think there's a giant UFO in the garage that we call the Great Pyramid. And we're like, why do they keep trying to figure out what this is? It's a garage for our stuff.
I don't know if there's any UFOs in there, but yeah, definitely go check out information on Bob Lazar. It's a pretty interesting story. Leave down in the comments if you think UFOs have been here or extraterrestrials have been here for a long time.
And if you start putting no, you don't think so, you should reevaluate stuff. And then go research and then come back and write it when you believe.
All right. Have a good night.
Yep. Good night.
Bye.